thing to drink. But I will admit to having smoked some weed right beforehand, so I had a really dry mouth. So when it came 30 minutes later, I hadn't drank anything. I just smoked some weed, and I was sitting there like, oh boy, I got to try and fill this whole tube up with saliva right now. It was not an easy task. I also had the munchies, and you're not supposed to eat before you spit into this thing. So it was definitely got to prep my listeners for that. Like, don't be high when you do this. It was not easy to spit all of that in there, but once I'd done it, I sealed it up. It was really easy. Copied down my specific number and then mailed it back to you guys. And not too long later, I got this incredible report, which I believe you all have. And I guess we should have a look at and see what you found out about me and my genes. Mm-hmm. So, my GreenWay DNA report. My results say that I'm doing way too much in the THC range, as predicted, and not enough at all in the CBD range. It looks like I can take methods of ingestion that I also wasn't thinking about. You guys have pointed out to me that I should be trying some oils, tinctures, edibles, and cartridges. What is the reason for those recommendations for that method of ingestion?
Yeah, so the reason that we look at oil-based products like that is a couple of reasons. One of those is, earlier you talked about strains, and we stay agnostic to strains. There's just not enough data around it. And also, the reality is you and I could live in the same house and grow a plant cut from the same mother, and the genetics could be different. So it's nearly impossible to get the same strain having the same amount of cannabinoids over any length of time. And, the other thing is the bioavailability of it. So the CBD and THC tends to bind well to lipids, fat-based cells, so that your bioavailability is much higher through there. So someone that's smoking like yourself, it's, number one, difficult to measure the dosage versus a droplet where you can sort of guide your dosage a bit more easily.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and those are just kind of general recommendations, again, on those lists. So everyone has their form that they like better. I personally love the tinctures. I think that it's super easy to use. I can control what I'm doing. I like the prolonged effect of everything, the way it lasts longer. And again, the bioavailability of it has been proven to be better overall.
I think I just grew up as a smoker, like I was a naughty teenage kid with a joint. I didn't ever think about oils and tinctures, But
there's a lot of that. I listen, if someone told me when I was 17 that I'd be sitting here talking about, legal cannabis and ways to dose it, I would have laughed at you.
Yeah, exactly. So there's also results on 7 genetic variants that you guys found in my sample. And there are a couple of questions that I have about, some of them seem to counter each other. In one of the variants, I seem to be able to, have a lot of THC, and one of the other variants says you don't want to take a lot of THC. What do you do when you have these conflicting variants? How does that impact your recommendation?
Yeah, that's part of the development of the mathematics behind making these recommendations. So it's a fairly complex mathematical equation. So each variant has a different level of, say, implications on efficacy. Mm. So the easiest way to say it is you've got a chair that has a leg that has been cut off of the chair, or you have a chair that just needs a napkin put underneath it to balance it out, and so one variant may be that chair just needs a little bit of steadying with a piece of cardboard underneath it, and the other is you can't use the chair because it's missing the whole leg. And so each variant has a different implication in terms of how we weight it. And that's that mathematical model. So what you're seeing in your report is the individual, as if you had only each one of those variants only by itself. What does that variant do? But what you're not told in that report is one variant more dominant or important than another variant? And that is what we do in the background for you with knowing that information and putting that into the model so that you get that right balance.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you guys doing that. I'm going to read some of this out to you guys. Our test reveals that you have the following variants. Okay, I have 5 variants detected in one or more cannabinoid transporter or receptor genes. I have 1 variant in one or more cannabinoid signaling genes, and I have 1 variant in one or more cannabinoid metabolic enzyme genes. Whew, that's a lot of science, you guys. But basically, what it boils down to is these gene variants are able to tell you that I have, for example, one of these gene variants can say that I have an increased risk of THC dependence, and thus avoiding high doses of THC is likely to benefit me. There are a couple of different gene variants that I have that also said I expressed, a likelihood of cannabis-dependent antidepressant treatment response, a risk of anxiety, and, I should basically avoid high doses of THC because I have in my genes, apparently, the possibility to become dependent on substances. Well, breaking news, I'm actually a recovered drug addict. So how crazy is that? Mm-hmm. And it really, when I was coming off heavier drugs in my mid-20s, I started to have to deal with my anxiety and depression. And that's sort of where I found cannabis fit into my life to help me through both coming off the harder drugs and then sort of almost continually I found that I wanted to smoke. So I do seem to have some sort of, I at least depend on it mentally, I suppose is the best way to put it. But it's amazing how very accurate some of these results really were. And I could look back on my life and be like, oh, yeah, maybe that was because of genes. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool.
The story that you just told is, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And secondly, I want to say that's more common than you might think. So in developing the test and validating it and running beta tests, different types of trials, it was fairly revealing how many people had other conditions in their life or other periods in their life where it was either drug dependency or a particular problem with some other metabolic phenomena that understanding what the genes were helped them see things differently. So one person that I know personally had a story very similar to what you just said with regard to dependency and to drug abuse in the past. And it was, for her, it was just eye-opening. She goes, okay, I understand now. And she made some changes in terms of her cannabis use. She still uses cannabis and had turned to that after using more potent drugs in her past, and made some changes to that based on this test and test results. And it really helped her find a nice balance. Another example is an individual who was using cannabis for gastrointestinal issues and had been going to medical doctors for a long time about this and found that certain strains of cannabis that she smoked would help with it, but it was so variable in what she could find and when it worked and when it didn't work. And turns out that she has one of the variants that I know you have in your metabolic system. And these cannabinoids are basically lipids. They're fatty acids. And she, has a variant that causes her to be less able to process certain lipids or fatty acids. And so a lot of the gastrointestinal things were rooted in her genetics and her diet. And when she saw that, her first question was, why didn't my doctor tell me this? Right? Was she had to sort of find her way on her own to this answer. She found that cannabis really helped. And when you can see what that variant is, you understand why cannabis was helping with those types of issues as well. So there's a lot of insight that can come from taking the test that goes beyond even the recommendation of the dosage for cannabinoids.
Definitely. It's making me kind of reflect more on how I use cannabis. I'm a smoker. I think that's just a habitual thing, and I have been since high school. But I now understand that some of that substance use disorder that I have dealt with for a lot of my young adult life up until recently has some sort of basis in my genes. And if I can be aware that that is something that may impact me for the rest of my life, I can maybe take some more control of it, consciously. So I think that it's really going to change the way that I treat cannabis, because at the moment, at least from the start of the pandemic, I started smoking every day, and it's good weed here in Massachusetts. So it's it's high THC, and apparently smoking high THC is not great for me. I've been recommended by you guys to stick to low or no THC, avoid high doses of THC. Increased doses of THC may harm anxiety issues. There's all of this information in my cells that is now revealed to me that has told me, actually, you've been using the wrong kind of cannabis. You've been focusing on the wrong method of ingestion. And now instead of smoking, high-grade THC, maybe I can pick smoking CBD, hemp, something a little more heavy in that area, and then just add some tincture at night to help with the insomnia, because that's one of the issues that I'd listed here was insomnia. And that seems to be, CBD helps a lot of people for insomnia. That makes total sense. I guess I've just got to wean myself off that good green, I'm afraid. But I really appreciate that you guys opened my eyes to all of these different possibilities, that it's not about just picking another strain. It's not just about, oh, you got to try this one. This is the good one. This is the one that's going to hit you every time. And there's possibilities out there that work for different bodies in different ways. And I think that turning to science is probably the one and only way that we can really understand how to better use marijuana medicinally. So I love what you guys are doing. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to explain to me how you do your work and how we come up with these results. The last thing I really want to know is, how can people find out more about you, more about how they can take one of these tests and figure out how to better use cannabis for themselves?
Yeah, so first thing would be to head to GreenWayDNA.com. You can see a sample report there. So for those of you listening that aren't looking at Brit's report, you guys can go on there and view a sample report. It's obviously different for everybody, but it'll give you a great idea of what you're expecting, what you're looking at. There's a really great wallet card that we include with there. So people that want to go to their dispensaries, they can bring the card in. We find that may decrease some of the stress level of entering a dispensary if you've never done it before, and really have that help. And then also we're on all social media. So you can go to Instagram. You could find me on LinkedIn. So if you have any questions or comments, anybody wants to find anything out, please don't hesitate to reach out. We want to make this a full service experience and really help people find their path to wellness, and have everybody feel better.
Thank you guys so much for joining me.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
And now for your latest US cannabis news. The number of medical marijuana patients has skyrocketed in Massachusetts, hitting an all-time high of 100,000 this month, according to the Boston Business Journal. Last year, right before the pandemic hit, there were around 68,000 cardholders. That means during COVID, around 32,000 new patients got their cards. In comparison, the year before, less than 2,000 new patients got their cards. The leaders of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus have written a letter to President Biden this week, asking him to do a mass pardon for all people with non-violent federal marijuana convictions in the United States. The letter has been signed by 37 members of Congress, including Jim McGovern of Massachusetts, Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, and AOC of New York. It's very early days, but a cannabis legalization bill has made the initial steps through the state legislature in Minnesota. A key state house committee approved the bill last week, which, if it passes into law, would allow adults in Minnesota to purchase and possess up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis and cultivate up to 8 plants at home. Remember the November 3rd elections?